When I turned 18, life took a sharp and unexpected turn. My parents and twin sister decided there wasn't enough room for me in our home, effectively pushing me out. For the next several years, I struggled with instability, bouncing between makeshift living arrangements, including even living in a tent, and doing whatever it took to survive. Despite these challenges, I managed to build a stable life for myself and eventually bought my own house. Now, at 26, just as I've found my footing, my family, led by my sister, who is pregnant with her fourth child, has suddenly reappeared. They showed up unannounced, expecting to move in. This is the same sister who had advocated for my removal from our family home, claiming it was too small for both of us. Throughout my childhood, I always felt overshadowed by my sister. My parents were open about their favoritism toward her, even admitting they wouldn't have had me if it weren't for her conception. She was always their priority, her needs taking precedence over mine, from toys to clothes, while I received just enough to keep up appearances. My sister has always exhibited narcissistic tendencies, likely nurtured by our parents' biased treatment. She was a constant source of emotional turmoil, undermining me at every opportunity instead of offering the support one might expect from a sibling. The only family member who saw the injustice was our grandfather, who treated me with kindness. His passing when I was 15 marked the end of any warmth in my family life. As teenagers, when my sister became pregnant, our parents arranged for her to marry her boyfriend and brought him into our already overcrowded home. I didn't even have a couch to sleep on, as my father often used it, with no space left for me and strict instructions not to reach out to extended family, lest I expose the dysfunctional reality of our household. I was completely cast out. At one point, I lived in a tent in our backyard, a situation that arose after the police returned me home following a brief period of homelessness. My parents allowed it as a reward for keeping quiet about the truth of our family life. Years of hardship followed, but my determination led me to build a better life for myself, both emotionally and materially. Now, with my family attempting to encroach on the life I've fought so hard to create, I find myself at a crossroads. They offered me a place to stay in their backyard if I cleaned it up first. I accepted, despite the mess, flour, sugar, and debris scattered everywhere, along with a rodent infestation. I was at my lowest, and even though my sister seemed relieved to see me leave, remarking about the lack of space, no one cared enough to ask where I was going. Cleaning up the area and dealing with the rodents was a tough task, but I eventually made the space livable. Though I dropped out of high school just months before graduation, I found purpose in my job and soon realized I needed to enhance my skills to secure a better future. Growing up, I often helped my father, a service technician, with repairs, and this experience came in handy. I pursued further education and landed a job at a car manufacturing plant. Through hard work and dedication, I worked my way up to becoming a design manager. Now, as my past tries to resurface, I am prepared to confront it and protect the life I've built. Recently, an old friend, going through a divorce, needed to sell his house quickly. Although I hesitated at first, the significant discount and flexible payment terms he offered made it an opportunity one couldn't pass up. So, I purchased the 4-bedroom house and moved in 3 weeks ago. To my surprise, my estranged family showed up unannounced at my new home. Given that we hadn't spoken in years and I lived 17 miles away, their visit caught me off guard. I suspect a neighbor, still connected to me on social media, might have tipped them off. Upon barging in, my parents expressed pride in my accomplishments. It was surreal to see them acting impressed with me being a homeowner at 36, while they still rented. My sister and her husband wandered through the house as if they were inspecting it for themselves, and when I confronted them, they claimed they were just checking on me. Suddenly, my family, who had been absent for years, seemed interested in my life, just when I needed them least. During the visit, my sister brazenly claimed one of the bedrooms, excited about the attached private bathroom, as though it was already decided she'd be moving in. My parents half-heartedly attempted to tell her to manage her kids better, but the whole situation was absurd. I was stunned by their boldness and firmly rejected any discussions about them staying with me. The conversation escalated quickly. They tried to guilt-trip me, insisting it was my family duty to house my sister and her children. In a moment of frustration, I made it clear that it was my parents' responsibility to provide for their children, not mine. I demanded they leave, reinforcing that I had built my life independently and wasn't obligated to solve their lack of planning or space. As they finally left, I felt a wave of relief, knowing that I had asserted my independence and protected my peace. I had spent years yearning for family support that never came, and now, ironically, they appeared when I had no need for them. Years ago, My grandfather had been fine with letting my cousin sleep on the couch, but when I asked for the same favor, he refused and kicked me out. I vented my frustrations to my family, recounting how I had lived with rodents in my employer's garage, and then in a cramped apartment for 10 long years, all while they never checked on me once. As I spoke, my mother began to cry, trying to hug me, but I stopped her, insisting they leave. Jayan, my sister's husband, told me to toughen up, recounting his own hardships and implying I had more than enough space since I was single. His comment enraged me, and I sharply told him to be quiet. My sister cursed at me for speaking to her husband that way, but I stood firm and made it clear that if they didn't leave, things would escalate. I ushered them out, shutting down any further arguments. My anger was intense. They had always been toxic and self-serving, and now their greed was on full display. As the door closed behind them, I stood in my own space, relieved, free at last from the burden of their uninvited expectations. I savored the peace I had worked so hard to create. I was no longer the compliant teenager they once manipulated. If they pushed me further, I was prepared to involve the police. No, my sister had never once offered to pay rent. She and her husband had been living off my parents for over a decade, and now it seemed like they were trying to shift that burden onto me. Despite the clear strain on my parents, they never pushed her out, instead hoping I would take her off their hands. A week after our first confrontation, my mother came by again. This time, she was more direct. She argued that my house had enough space to accommodate my sister and her family. She repeated the same points about her place being too crowded, but I held firm. When persuasion didn't work, she moved to subtle threats, implying that having family around would make my home safer and help with upkeep. I saw right through her manipulations and told her to leave, making it clear she wasn't welcome back if she continued. Not long after, a neighbor informed me of suspicious activity near my house. He said he saw a pregnant woman, a man, and a young boy looking into my windows and lingering around the backyard, possibly trying to break in. I thanked him for his vigilance, gave him my contact details, and planned to install security cameras as soon as possible. But it wasn't soon enough. Just 5 days later, that same neighbor called again, telling me he thought someone had broken into my home. When I rushed back, I found that he was right. My sister and her husband, John, had broken in through a back window. Confronting them, my sister claimed they had no other choice and accused me of being unreasonable. John, with a smug grin, commented on how easy it was to break in. Furious, I lost my temper and got into a physical altercation with him. As my sister tried to intervene, their teenage son hit me over the head with a bottle, causing a gash that bled profusely. Everything descended into chaos. My sister immediately called our parents, telling them I had attacked them. When the police arrived, my sister and John frantically apologized, begging the officers not to arrest their son, but I was determined to press charges. My sister, however, denied the break-in, saying they were just visiting and their son's actions were a harmless prank. When my parents arrived, they tried to pressure me into dropping the charges, defending my sister and twisting the situation to make me look vindictive, but I wasn't about to let them rewrite what had happened in my own home. Thankfully, my neighbor stepped in with a statement that confirmed the break-in and assault, leading to the arrests. They spent the night in jail because my parents couldn't afford to post bail. The next morning, they faced trial while I was in the hospital, treating my head injury and making sure there were no serious complications. I took time off work to recover and pressed charges for assault, as well as seeking compensation for my legal fees, which the court awarded. My parents continued to beg me to drop the charges, but I stood my ground, even warning them that I'd take legal action if they kept interfering. Since their son is a minor, he was handled under juvenile law, spending time in a facility while his parents were held liable for restitution, covering my lost wages and medical expenses. My sister and John were hit with hefty fines. To ease their financial burden, they asked if part of the fine could be swapped for community service. Things have been quiet since then. I hope they've finally learned their lesson and stay out of my life. However, my parents haven't let it go. Just the other day, they showed up at my door. After waiting outside for over an hour, I reluctantly let them in, only to find they were asking me to help my sister again. I refused outright. Then they revealed their true motive. They're getting older, their home is falling apart, and they wanted to move in with me, expecting me to take care of them. When I confronted them about how they've handled their responsibilities as parents, they mentioned their plan to give their house to my sister. They even suggested that I let her live with me and pay rent to help with my mortgage. I told them I wouldn't be manipulated again and showed them the door. I stood my ground, telling them firmly that my sister's financial problems were hers to solve, not mine. as they continued to plead, insisting the house was too big for just one person. I made it clear that my future wouldn't involve staying single or taking them in out of obligation. Their attempts at emotional manipulation fell flat. I reminded them of how they had treated me in the past, refusing to let guilt steer me into compliance. It was obvious they were trying to exploit our family ties for their own benefit, but I held fast to my boundaries, knowing I needed to protect my well-being and my future. After they left, visibly upset, I closed the door behind them, regardless of what names they might throw at me. I was determined not to cave to their demands or let them trample over me again. Now, with that chapter behind me, I turned my attention to yet another challenge in my life.